The scream never left her throat. It lived there, burned there, coiled behind her teeth like something alive and desperate and too proud to break free. Because breaking would mean they won. Breaking would mean she was exactly what they had always whispered about her when they thought she could not hear. Small, forgettable, a woman built to be passed over. And tonight, passed over is exactly what she became. In front of 500 wolves, under ancestral banners soaked in gold and legacy, with the sound of applause drowning out the crack of her heart, splitting down the center like dry wood fed to flame. Leora Ashvane stood 10 steps from the man who was supposed to be hers and watched him sink his fangs into another woman's neck. 10 steps. She counted them because counting kept the scream locked. 10 marble tiles between her shoes and his boots. 10 squares of polished stone that might as well have been an ocean. She could smell the blood from where she stood, could see the exact angle of his jaw as it pressed deeper, could hear the soft, obscene sound of puncture meeting flesh and flesh, welcoming puncture. The great hall of Blackmoor erupted. Vaulted ceilings caught the roar of 500 wolves and hurled it back down like caged thunder. Gold braziers flared along every pillar, flames leaning sideways under the pressure of so many dominant auras packed into one space. Ancestral banners rippled overhead, heavy silk threads depicting centuries of alpha kings who had claimed their mates beneath this same roof, under this same blood moon light pouring through the cathedral windows, with this same ancient bite that turned 2 into 1. And Draven Kale, Alpha King of Blackmoor, ruler of the Northern Dominion, first of his bloodline to unite the 3 mountain territories under a single throne, chose someone else. Isolde arched into the bite with breathless ecstasy, her fingers curled into the fabric of his ceremonial coat, knuckles white, pulling him closer as if the proximity was oxygen and she had been drowning her entire life. Her lips parted around a sound that was half prayer, half surrender, the kind of sound that fills a room and empties it simultaneously. Draven held her waist with both hands, steady, unshaking, his jaw locked against her throat as blood welled around his fangs and dripped in a slow crimson line down her collarbone, catching candlelight, catching gasps, catching the exact moment history recorded its choice. He did not hesitate. He did not look conflicted. He marked Isolde as if destiny had always belonged there, as if the universe had never whispered another name into his blood, as if 3 nights ago had never happened, but it had. 3 nights ago, beneath a blood moon so red it looked like the sky itself was hemorrhaging, Leora had walked the western corridor toward the kitchen quarters. She was not supposed to be in the royal wing. Servants rarely were after midnight. But the head cook had sent her for moon herbs that only grew in the terrace garden adjacent to the king's private chambers, and the path cut through a corridor lined with windows that faced the bleeding sky. She turned a corner. He was there, not expecting her, not expecting anyone. Standing at the window with his collar loosened, sleeves pushed to his elbows, hair falling across his forehead in a way that stripped every ounce of royal composure and left only the man underneath. He smelled like storm clouds and cedar bark and something deeper, something her bones recognized before her mind could name it. Their eyes met. The bond ignited. It did not whisper. It did not politely introduce itself. It detonated inside her chest like a star collapsing into gravity, and every nerve in her body rewired itself around a single, devastating certainty. Him, he is yours. He has always been yours. The recognition was not gentle. It was absolute. The kind of knowing that rearranges organs, that makes the blood in your veins run in a new direction, that turns every breath you have ever taken into a rehearsal for this one moment. His hand had reached toward her involuntarily, fingers trembling. The tremor was so slight that no one else in the world would have caught it, but she saw it because the bond made her see everything about him with unbearable precision. His pupils dilated. His breath caught audibly. The legendary control that had earned him the title of Blackmore's most disciplined king in 4 generations cracked for exactly one heartbeat. One heartbeat in which his walls fell, and she saw the man behind the throne, and the man saw her. Then he pulled his hand back, curled his fingers into a fist. The walls rebuilt themselves brick by brick behind his eyes, and he turned away from her without a single word. She stood in that corridor for 11 minutes after he left. She knew because the kitchen clock chimed twice. Her hands would not stop shaking. The bond pulsed beneath her collarbone like a second heartbeat, warm, insistent, certain. It whispered his name into her bloodstream all night long. She did not sleep. She pressed her palm against the scar trying to form beneath her skin, and felt it glow with warmth that should not exist between a servant girl and a king. She had believed, foolishly, dangerously, with the reckless faith of someone who had never been given anything but suddenly tasted possibility. She had believed that fate meant protection. Tonight, fate meant spectacle. Draven withdrew his fangs from Isolde's throat, slowly, deliberately. He licked the blood from the wound in a long, measured stroke that was part ritual and part performance, sealing the mark, sealing the claim, sealing Leora's erasure with the same tongue that might have, in another life, whispered her name against her skin. The High Elder's staff struck marble 3 times. The sound was ancient and final, iron against stone, the sound of doors locking from the inside. Witnessed the claiming of the Alpha King's chosen mate. The hall shook with approval. Goblets raised, wolves howled. The sound of 500 voices celebrating a union that was supposed to be sacred filled the air with the density of something Leora would carry in her lungs for years. And then the bond snapped. It did not fade. It did not loosen gradually, giving her time to prepare, to brace, to find something to hold on to. It snapped, a violent psychic recoil that detonated behind her sternum like a second heart being ripped out through the first. The pain was white. Absolute. Total. It dropped her to one knee on the marble floor, and the sound of her kneecap striking stone cut through the applause like a blade through wet paper. Gasps rippled outward. Not sympathy, recognition. The particular kind of recognition that a pack gives to weakness when weakness is detected in public. There. She is the one. The rejected mate. She felt it. She actually felt the bond break. Humiliation has a scent. Leora learned that in the space of a single breath. It is sharp, metallic, involuntary. It rises from the skin like blood from a wound you cannot cover, and it announces itself to every wolf in range with the precision of a signal fire lit on a mountain top. There is no hiding it. There is no composing your face fast enough to outrun what your body has already confessed. Every wolf in that hall turned toward her. Every nose caught it. Every eye followed. She was on her knees in front of a kingdom. Draven's eyes found hers over Isolde's shoulder. She searched them for something, anything. A flicker of regret, a fracture in the performance, a single crack that proved the man in the corridor still existed somewhere behind the crown. His gaze was cold, resolved, public, but his hand His hand gripped the thrown arm so hard the ancient wood groaned beneath his fingers. A tremor ran through his knuckles, barely visible, lasting less than a second. His jaw was locked, not in triumph, but in the act of crushing something before it could surface. She noticed, she stored it, and she hated herself for looking. Leora pressed her hand against her collarbone where the mate scar had tried to form. It burned, then it froze. Then it became an absence so complete, it felt like a hole had been carved into her with surgical precision. Her wolf withdrew, not howling, not thrashing anymore, just retreating to a place deep inside her chest where the pain could not follow. The silence of that withdrawal hurt worse than the snap, because a wolf that stops fighting is a wolf that has accepted something its human half is not yet ready to name. She forced herself to stand. Her knees screamed. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she stood, because the alternative was remaining on the floor, and the floor of Blackmoor's great hall had swallowed enough of her dignity tonight. And then the air changed. It happened from opposite ends of the hall simultaneously, like two weather fronts colliding before a hurricane makes landfall. 3 dominant auras sharpened with terrifying precision, cutting through the celebration like blades drawn in a room that believed itself safe. Alpha Theron of Ashfang rose first from his seat at the eastern table. War-scarred, territorial, merciless, his face was a topography of battles survived. A jagged line ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin, and his eyes locked onto Leora with an intensity that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the wolf beneath his skin, responding to the psychic shockwave of a bond rejection. His nostrils flared, his hands flattened on the table, his chair scraped backward with a sound that silenced the wolves nearest to him. Alpha Valdric of Western Ridge moved second, cold strategist, unblinking. Lethal restraint packaged in diplomatic stillness. He did not stand so much as unfold, each vertebra straightening with the deliberate precision of a man who never made an unconsidered movement. His gaze swept from Leora to Draven to Isolde and back again, mapping the room the way a general maps terrain before committing forces. Alpha Emmerich of Shadow Vale shifted last. Velvet voice, iron will, danger disguised as grace. He leaned forward with the slow curiosity of a predator who had just scented something rare and was deciding whether it was prey or something far more interesting. His lips curved into a smile that promised nothing safe and everything significant. They had not been part of the ceremony. They were witnesses, dignitaries, political guests invited to observe the stability of Blackmoor's throne. Now they were contenders. One by one they stood, and the cheering faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence as the hall registered what was happening. 3 apex predators, each ruling territories that bordered Blackmoor, each powerful enough to challenge the crown independently, were rising in unison. Not for politics, for her. A low growl rippled across the marble floor. Not from one throat. 3. Theron stepped forward first, his boots striking stone with the authority of a man who had never once stepped backward for anyone. Valdric moved to the right flank with tactical precision. Emmerich circled behind Leora with slow, deliberate grace, close enough that the warmth of his presence reached her skin without contact. They were not rushing her. They were forming a perimeter, protective, possessive, ancient instinct responding to ancient law. The High Elder's voice shook. Alphas, stand down. This is sovereign territory. No one listened. Draven descended from the dais, Fury flared off him in waves that made the brazier flames bend sideways. She is not yours. Theron's gaze never left Leora. You forfeited. The word cracked like thunder through the silent hall. Isolde's triumphant smile vanished. The newly marked Luna clutched her own throat as if the fresh bite could be undone by a single word spoken loudly enough. Draven's voice dropped to a register that vibrated through the floor. Take one more step toward her, and I will challenge you to the death. Valdric answered evenly, without raising his voice, without changing his posture. Then, draw your line. Emmerich's voice reached Leora's ear from behind, low and devastatingly calm. You do not stand alone. The words carried both warmth and warning, not just for her, for everyone who thought she was unprotected. The hall balanced on the edge of massacre. 4 dominant wolves pressing against one another's territories in a space too small for even 2. Claws slid from knuckles. Fangs descended. The scent of aggression thickened the air until breathing felt like swallowing smoke. And Leora spoke, not loud, not trembling, not desperate. Her voice was scraped raw by pain, but held together by something harder than pride. Something that lived in the marrow of a woman who had been broken publicly and refused to stay broken on anyone's schedule but her own. I belong to no one tonight. The hall absorbed the words the way stone absorbs rain, slowly, completely. Theron's jaw flexed, his head inclined, not in retreat, in respect edged with something more dangerous than desire, acknowledgement. Valdric stepped back one precise pace. Respect, he said. One word. It carried volumes. Emmerich did not move, but his smile shifted. Softer. More patient. Space, he murmured, and the syllable held a promise that space was temporary. Draven looked as though she had driven a blade between his ribs. His mouth opened, closed. The wolf surged beneath his skin, visible in the shadows that rippled across his jaw. But Leora had already turned toward the doors. She walked toward the massive carved entrance of the great hall. Closed. Always closed. For years she had stood on the wrong side of doors like these, waiting for permission, waiting for someone to decide she was worthy of passage. Her fingers pressed against the cold iron handle. She pushed. The doors opened for her, not because someone allowed it, because she chose it. The cold night struck her skin like a baptism. Stone steps descended into darkness. Behind her, the hall vibrated with unspoken consequences. Alliances trembling. A newly marked Luna standing confused on the dais. An Alpha King watching the exit she chose with an expression that looked nothing like victory. Leora descended the stone steps, each one hurt, each one steadied. Her chest ached with phantom bond pain pulsing in waves, but her spine did not curve. Her head did not bow. Halfway down, a sound stopped her, muffled, frightened, coming from the alcove beneath the watchtower, a girl's voice, begging. Leora's wolf stirred, not for herself this time, for the sound. The hurt animal inside her chest lifted its head at the scent of someone else's fear and responded to the one thing that outranked her own pain. Instinct. Not the instinct of dominance, the instinct of protection. She found them in the shadow of the guard tower. A young servant girl, small, barely 17, pressed against the stone wall by a palace soldier twice her size. His hand gripped her arm hard enough to leave bruises that would bloom purple by morning. The girl's eyes were wet with the specific terror of someone who knows that no one is coming to help. Please, I only came to bring water for the celebration. I was told to bring water. The soldier's lip curled. You came where you were not summoned, girl. Servants learn their place, or they learn it harder. Leora stepped into the alcove. Every ounce of pain in her chest rearranged itself into something useful. The bond scar throbbed. The humiliation still clung to her skin, but she looked at this girl and felt something that mattered more than her own wreckage. Release her. The soldier turned, recognized her. His contempt was instant, practiced, delivered with the particular cruelty reserved for those who have just publicly fallen. The rejected one gives orders now. Perhaps you should worry about your own position before defending someone else's. Leora did not raise her voice. She stepped closer. Close enough that her scent reached him, still sharp with residual bond trauma. The sharpness made his wolf uncertain, because damaged wolves are unpredictable wolves, and unpredictable wolves make soldiers nervous. I said, release her, or I will ensure Captain Orath learns that you assault servants during a sacred ceremony. The king's hospitality was extended to every soul under this roof tonight. I imagine the punishment for violating it is something you would prefer to avoid. The soldier hesitated. Calculated risk against consequence. His hand opened. The girl stumbled forward. Leora caught her, steadied her, examined the bruise already darkening on her thin arm. Without a word, Leora tore a strip from the hem of her own ceremonial dress, the dress she had chosen with such care this morning when she still believed tonight would end differently, and wrapped it gently around the girl's wrist. No one deserves to be treated like that, she said softly. The girl looked up at her with wide, dark eyes. You are the one from the hall, the one he rejected. A beat of silence. The word rejected landed on Leora's shoulders like a stone she would carry for a long time. Yes, but you stopped. For me. Even tonight. Leora's throat tightened. Pain is not permission to ignore someone else's. The girl clutched Leora's hand for one fierce second, then slipped into the servant corridor and vanished. Leora watched her go and filed the moment somewhere deep. Not for reward, not for karma, for proof. Proof that the woman Draven Kale had discarded in front of a kingdom was still someone who stopped for a frightened girl in a dark alcove on the worst night of her life. She turned back toward the courtyard gates, drew one long breath of cold air, and then the world narrowed. Boots on stone, 6 royal guards emerged from the shadow of the watchtower. Armored, disciplined, hands positioned near blades with the particular readiness of men who had been given uncomfortable orders. Behind them stepped Captain Orath, Draven's most loyal enforcer. Tall, silver-templed, expression carved from years of obeying commands he did not always agree with. I was ordered to ensure your safe return to the palace, Orath said carefully. Safe. The word tasted like rust. You mean detention? The rival alphas remain inside the hall. Their dominance is escalating. The council believes removing you from visibility will reduce tensions. Removing, reducing, erasing the problem. The language of disposal delivered in the vocabulary of protection. I am not property to relocate, Leora said. A growl cut through the courtyard. Not from any soldier, from the forest line beyond the iron gates. Every guard stiffened. Hands found hilts. Stances widened. Theron stepped from the tree line like a storm taking human shape. No armor, no escort, no permission. His scent was wildfire and ironwood, rolling ahead of him in waves of territorial intent so thick Leora could taste it on her tongue. Behind him, 2 more presences materialized from shadow. Valdric, perfectly composed, hands clasped behind his back. Emmerich moving through darkness as though he owned it. They had not retreated to their quarters. They had followed her. Orath cursed softly. This is precisely the destabilization we feared. Theron's eyes found Leora's first. Only hers. You are not going back in there. Not a question, not a suggestion. Dominance threaded through the words like iron through silk. Emmerich appeared at her other side. Close enough for warmth, not close enough for assumption. His voice was low, meant for her alone. Are you harmed? Before she could answer, the air above them shifted. Draven Kale stepped onto the palace balcony, crown still on his head. The mark of another woman fresh and vivid on his throat, visible even from below, catching moonlight like an accusation written in blood. He descended. Each step measured, controlled, dominance rolling outward with every footfall until the courtyard felt too small to hold one more molecule of tension. His gaze locked onto Leora, something raw, something he was failing to contain. Leora, her name from his mouth. Rougher now, stripped of the regal distance it had carried in the hall. You send soldiers after her, Theron called upward. Interesting definition of forfeiture. Emmerich's quiet laugh carried the weight of a drawn blade. Protection, you said. From whom, I wonder? Draven's eyes never left her. Leora, come inside. Not invitation, need wrapped in the last remnants of command, his wolf pressing against his skin, visible in the way shadows deepened across his face, in the way his hands curled at his sides. You do not get to soften now, she said. And then the night screamed. The first arrow came from the eastern rooftop, cutting through moonlight with surgical precision. Silent, swift, aimed not at Draven, not at Theron, not at any alpha, aimed at Leora. Emmerich moved on instinct, pulling her sideways with a grip that left no room for hesitation. The arrow struck stone where her heart had been 1 second earlier. The tip shattered on impact, releasing a mist that carried the unmistakable scent of wolf's bane. Professional, calculated, designed for a kill. The second arrow came faster. Draven intercepted it mid-air with a clawed hand that materialized from half-shift before conscious thought could intervene. The shaft snapped in his grip. Blood ran down his palm, not from poison, from the force of the catch. He moved without deciding to move, placing his body between hers and every possible angle of attack. His chest covered her entirely. His arms curved around her, not gently, with the desperate architecture of a man shielding something he cannot afford to lose. Her face was inches from the mark on his throat. She could smell Isolde on him, fresh, intimate, the specific scent of blood and saliva and claiming that clung to newly bonded skin. And beneath it, still there, undeniable, his own scent. Storm and cedar and something her bones recognized with the precision of a wound that has never fully healed. Touch her, he roared into the darkness beyond the gates, his voice no longer royal, no longer measured, purely and absolutely feral. And I will burn every forest that shelters you. The third arrow came from a different angle entirely. Redesigned trajectory. New position. Aimed at Draven's exposed back. Aimed at his heart. Leora saw it. The moonlight caught the shaft for 1 fractured second as it cut through the night. Time stretched, expanded. Gave her enough space to understand what was happening and make a choice. She could let it strike. Let the king who erased her bleed. Let the universe correct what ceremony had broken. There was a version of justice in that. A poetic symmetry. The man who killed a bond paying with the heart that should have honored it. Her body moved before her pride finished deliberating. She shoved him, both hands against his chest, hard enough to stagger an alpha king. The arrow tore through the air where his heart had been and grazed his ribs instead, slicing a hot red line through flesh and fabric before embedding itself in the palace column behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Draven staggered sideways. Shock detonated across his face. Not at the wound, at her. Theron shifted fully in the space of a breath, fur and muscle and pure predatory violence tearing through formal clothes as he launched into the tree line. Valdric barked commands with the precision of a man who had been waiting for chaos his entire career. Emmerich vanished upward, scaling the rooftop with terrifying grace, and returned moments later, dragging an accomplice by the throat. But the primary assassin was already dead when they found him. Poison capsule clenched between his teeth. Bitten. Gone before the last breath left his lungs. His final words, spat through blood and foam in the seconds before the toxin claimed him, landed in the courtyard like something heavier than stone. She is the fracture point. Leora heard the words and felt them lodge somewhere behind her ribs, not because they were new, because they were familiar. 3 weeks ago, in a council session she had overheard while serving tea, Elder Seren had used those exact words, his voice measured and persuasive as he argued against unmated females attending the blood moon ceremony. Unmated bonds create fracture points in political stability. The same phrasing, the same framing. Coincidence sits differently when it arrives, covered in blood. She looked across the courtyard toward the upper balcony. Elder Seren stood there, watching the chaos below with perfect stillness. The black wax ring on his finger caught moonlight as he turned it slowly. His face betrayed nothing. Not surprise, not concern. Not the specific kind of fear that innocent men display when assassination unfolds beneath their window. His hands were perfectly steady, and steady hands in a night where every wolf in the courtyard trembled with adrenaline and dominance, and the aftershock of violence were the most dangerous thing Leora had ever seen. Draven stood bleeding. The wound at his ribs spread crimson through white linen. The physician who rushed forward confirmed what the scent already told them. Wolf's bane, slow acting, designed for dominant suppression before organ failure. 3 days. He had 3 days before the poison reached his heart. 3 days before the most powerful alpha in the Northern Dominion lost control of his wolf entirely. If that happened here, surrounded by 3 rival alphas already circling, already testing, already drawn to the power vacuum that rejection and assassination had cracked open, the civil war that every elder feared would not be a possibility. It would be an inevitability. 3 days. The clock had started. Draven caught Leora's arm as the courtyard erupted around them with shouted orders and drawn steel and the organized chaos of a palace shifting into siege posture. His grip was not controlling. It was the grip of a man reaching for something he already knows is slipping through his fingers. His eyes were no longer regal, no longer distant, no longer the calculated eyes of a king who had chosen strategy over soul. They were the eyes of the man in the corridor 3 nights ago, trembling, cracked, terrified, not of assassins, not of poison, not of rival alphas, of losing her. "I will not lose you," he breathed. The words hit the bond scar beneath her collarbone like a match struck against charred wood. Something flared. Something that should have been dead. Something that refused. She looked at his hand on her arm, at the blood running between his fingers, at the fear written across a face that had shown her nothing but coldness for 3 nights, at the mark on his throat, still fresh, still vivid, still belonging to a woman who was not her. "You already did," she whispered. She pulled her arm free and walked into the night. Behind her, Draven Kale stood bleeding in a courtyard full of rivals and soldiers and the echo of arrows that had changed everything. His crown sat crooked on his head. His wolf howled inside his chest with a sound that had no voice but shook the stones beneath his feet. She did not look back. And somewhere above them all, Elder Serene turned from the balcony with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose plans had survived their first night. The fracture point was walking away, and the fracture had only just begun. She did not sleep. The palace gave her a room because protocol demanded it. A rejected mate could not be turned out before dawn without formal council dismissal, and the council was in no condition to dismiss anyone tonight. So they gave her a room in the East Wing, far from the royal chambers, far from the celebration that had quieted into uneasy murmurs behind closed doors. The room was small, clean, impersonal, the kind of room you give someone you intend to forget by morning. Leora sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pressed both hands against the bond scar beneath her collarbone. It pulsed in waves. Not the warm, certain pulse of 3 nights ago when the bond first ignited. This was the pulse of something severed. Phantom pain. The body remembering what the soul was trying to release. Each wave pushed heat through her chest, then cold, then nothing. Then heat again, as if her blood could not decide whether to mourn or to burn. Her wolf lay curled in the deepest part of her, silent, not sleeping, wounded. A wolf that stops howling is a wolf that has turned its face toward the wall, and Leora understood that kind of silence because she had lived inside it before. When her mother died, when the pack she was born into dissolved into territory disputes and scattered her like seed on stone. When she arrived at Blackmoor with nothing but a name no one recognized and hands willing to work. She had rebuilt from silence before. She could do it again. But the memory of his eyes kept returning. Not the cold, resolved eyes of the ceremony. The other ones. The ones from the courtyard, when his hand caught her arm, and his voice broke on 2 words. "I will not lose you." As if he had the right. As if losing her was something that happened to him rather than something he chose with his mouth on another woman's throat. She pressed harder against the scar. It burned. She let it. Dawn arrived without ceremony. Gray light pushed through the narrow window and painted the room in the color of things half finished. Leora washed her face with cold water from the basin, changed into the only spare clothing available, a servant's shift that someone had left folded on the chair. It fit poorly. It fit honestly. She was reaching for the door handle when a knock came. Soft, deliberate. The rhythm of someone accustomed to announcing themselves with precision. She opened it. Emmerich of Shadow Vale stood in the corridor. No armor, no entourage. A dark shirt with sleeves rolled to the forearm. His posture was relaxed in the specific way that very dangerous people relax. The looseness that says, "I do not need tension to be ready." "You did not sleep," he observed. "Neither did you." A faint smile. "I had reasons. Rooftops needed checking. Corridors needed walking. Your door needed someone outside it who was not one of Draven's soldiers." The implication settled between them. He had stood guard, not asked, not announced. simply stood in the dark outside her room while the palace slept uneasily around them. "Why?" she asked. His head tilted slightly. "Because the woman who pushed an Alpha King out of an arrow's path and then walked away from him without looking back is not someone I intend to let disappear quietly." The words were warm. They were also strategic. Leora heard both layers and filed them carefully. "I need to see him," she said. Emmerich's expression shifted. Not surprise. Something more careful. "The poison is advancing. His physicians have been with him since midnight. They are struggling. I know herbs. I worked the palace kitchens for 3 years. Before that, I apprenticed with a mountain healer who specialized in wolf's bane treatment." This time, Emmerich's eyebrows rose genuinely. "You have actual expertise." "I have actual expertise." He studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside and gestured down the corridor with an elegance that made the movement feel like an invitation to something much larger than a hallway. "Then, let us go, save a king who does not deserve it." The royal chamber smelled like fever, sweet, sharp, wrong. The scent of a dominant wolf losing control from the inside out. Leora caught it 3 corridors away and felt her wolf lift its head for the first time since the ceremony, not in longing, in recognition. The bond might be severed, but the body still knew his scent the way lungs know air. Involuntary, fundamental, infuriating. 2 physicians stood beside the bed looking exhausted and uncertain. Captain Oreth guarded the door with the rigid posture of a man who had not sat down in 12 hours. He looked at Leora with something between suspicion and reluctant hope. "She has healing knowledge," Emmerich said before Oreth could object. "More than your physicians, I suspect." Oreth hesitated, looked at the bed where his king lay with sweat soaking the sheets and shadows rippling beneath his skin as his wolf fought the toxin, looked back at Leora. "If he worsens because of you, I will hold you personally responsible." "He is already worsening without me," Leora replied, "so the risk calculus is simple." She dismissed the physicians with a calm authority that surprised even herself. They hesitated. She did not repeat herself. They left. The doors shut. Emmerich remained outside by choice, not exclusion. The room contracted to 2 people and the sound of labored breathing. Draven lay on his back. His shirt had been removed to treat the wound. The arrow graze along his ribs was angry red, the edges blackened where wolf's bane had entered his bloodstream. Veins around the wound had darkened visibly, mapping the poison's progress like rivers on a terrible cartograph. His skin burned with unnatural heat. His wolf pressed against the surface, visible in the way muscles twitched involuntarily, in the way his fingers curled and uncurled against the sheets, as if claws were trying to emerge and being forced back by sheer will. He looked smaller without the crown, without the ceremonial coat, without the controlled posture and the calculated distance. He looked like a man who had been fighting something all night and was beginning to lose. His eyes opened when she approached. They were glassy with fever, but sharpened instantly when they found her face. Relief flooded his expression before he could stop it. Raw, unhidden. The relief of a man who has been lying in the dark, wondering if she would come and hating himself for wondering. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was rough, scraped thin by hours of suppressing his wolf's attempts to surface. "You should not have marked her." The wound was still open. They both knew it. They both let it breathe. Leora examined the arrow graze with practiced fingers. She had treated Wolf's bane exposure twice before in the mountain village, where she had spent 3 years learning from a healer named Marin who believed that medicine was equal parts knowledge and stubbornness. The poison's progression followed a predictable pattern. Infiltrate the blood, suppress the wolf, attack the organs. The key was interrupting the second stage before it completed, because once a dominant wolf was fully suppressed, the body lost its primary defense system and the organs became vulnerable. She found what she needed in the physician's supplies: moonwort, iron thistle, a vial of distilled silver that would serve as a binding agent, not a cure, a deceleration. It would buy time. How much depended on his wolf's resilience? She mixed the compound in silence. Draven watched her hands, the concentration in her face, the way her fingers moved with the certainty of someone who had done this before, who carried knowledge in her body that had nothing to do with politics or beauty or the kind of value men measured at ceremonies. "You know what you are doing," he said, not a question. "I know many things you never asked about." The words landed precisely where she aimed them. His throat worked. A swallow that carried weight. She poured the compound against the wound. The liquid hissed when it met poisoned blood, and the sound was sharp enough to make her jaw clench. Draven did not flinch, but his hand shot out, fast, instinctive, and caught her wrist. Not harsh, not gentle. The grip of a man reaching for an anchor in a storm he cannot see the edge of. Heat slammed into her where he touched. Immediate. Devastating. The bond scar beneath her collarbone flared so sharply she almost gasped. Not healed, not gone. Just wounded and reactive, like a nerve that has been exposed and punished for it. "Let go," she said. His thumb shifted against her pulse point. She knew he could feel it racing. The betrayal of a heartbeat that had not received the message about dignity and distance. "You still feel it," he said quietly. "What I feel is irrelevant. It is the only thing that matters. Then you should have considered that before you chose applause over the bond." His grip loosened, not releasing, adjusting. His eyes searched hers with an intensity that the fever could not diminish. She saw the man from the corridor again, 3 nights ago, trembling hands, cracked control, the same desperate recognition that had detonated something sacred between them and been answered with silence and a turned back. "When I bit her," he said, voice low, almost raw, stripped to the grain, "I saw your face." Her breath stopped. "I saw you break. I watched it happen. I did not stop." The honesty was so brutal, it felt like a second rejection. Not because he said it, because he was not using it to excuse himself. He was laying it out like a wound of his own. "Look at what I did. Look at what it cost. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking you to know that I saw it." "Then why?" The question escaped before she could cage it. The one question she had promised herself she would never ask, because asking meant caring, and caring meant he still had power, and power was the thing she was trying to reclaim from the floor of that hall. Silence. The kind that strips pride like paint from old wood. "Because I believed choosing you would weaken the throne." She absorbed that. Let it settle into her bones, alongside the humiliation and the phantom pain, and the memory of marble against her kneecap. "And you were wrong," she said. "I was wrong about everything except the bond." His eyes held hers. "I was wrong about your strength. I was wrong about my own. I was wrong about what a throne requires. I was not wrong about what I felt in that corridor." Her chest ached in a way poison never could. The ache of something that refuses to die when it should. The ache of a bond that has been severed and still sends signals through scar tissue like a phantom limb, reaching for something the body remembers. Do not mistake reflex for forgiveness, she said. I do not. She pulled her wrist free. His hand remained open on the sheet where hers had been, palm up, fingers uncurled. The gesture was small. It felt like surrender. She stepped back. Distance returned. It cost them both. The compound will slow the poison. You have 3 days, perhaps slightly more now. Do not shift. Do not let your wolf surface. Every time your dominant form activates, the toxin accelerates. And after 3 days, you find whoever made this poison, and you find its antidote. Because what I gave you is a wall, not a cure. His gaze followed her as she moved toward the door. Not the gaze of a king, not the gaze of a strategist calculating his next political maneuver, the gaze of a man watching something precious walk away from him for the second time and understanding that this time he earned it. Leora. She paused, did not turn. Thank you. 2 words. No defense, no justification, no attempt to leverage the moment into reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, she was learning, could be more dangerous than apology because it required no response and demanded everything. She left without answering. Outside the chamber, 3 alpha wolves waited in the corridor with the particular tension of dominant males who have been listening through walls and pretending they have not. Theron leaned against the stone with arms crossed, his scarred face unreadable. He lives. For now. Pity. The word carried no real venom. It carried the complicated truth of a man who wanted the rival dead for strategic reasons, but recognized that death by poison served no one's honor. Valdric stood apart from the others, posture precise, hands clasped behind his back. The compound you administered. Mountaincraft? Yes. Marin's technique? Silver binding with moonwort base? Leora looked at him sharply. You know mountain healing. I know everything that might become useful. His gaze was steady, assessing, not cold so much as thorough. Your knowledge makes you more valuable than this palace understands. That can be an advantage or a vulnerability, depending on who discovers it first. The statement was not a compliment. It was a strategic briefing delivered with the courtesy of an observation. Leora filed it. Emmerich pushed off from the wall where he had been waiting with the patient stillness of someone accustomed to existing in shadows. The council convenes in 1 hour. They intend to discuss your removal from the palace as a de-escalation measure. My removal, Leora repeated, politely phrased, politically motivated, effectively exile. Her stomach tightened. 12 hours ago, she had been rejected publicly. Now they wanted to erase her entirely. The pattern was clear. Humiliate, contain, dispose. Who proposed it? She asked. Elder Seren. The name landed with the weight of the arrow that had carried the same man's vocabulary on an assassin's dying breath. She is the fracture point. Leora felt the thread connecting last night's assassination to this morning's political maneuver tighten like a wire being drawn taut. I will attend the council, she said. Theron's eyebrows rose. Uninvited? Necessary. Emmerich's smile returned. Slow, appreciating. I do like her. Valdric said nothing, but the corner of his mouth shifted by a fraction of a degree, and from a man who controlled every micro-expression like a chess piece, that fraction was practically applause. The council chamber was cold stone and high windows, and the particular atmosphere of men who believe their authority is structural rather than earned. 12 elders sat around a long oval table. Elder Seren occupied the chair closest to the head, the position of advisory supremacy, the seat that whispered into the king's ear before anyone else could speak. He was composed, silver-haired, thin-lipped. His black wax ring sat heavy on his right hand, catching the morning light that filtered through narrow windows. His daughter's bite mark had secured his position beside the throne. His daughter's bond had been his architecture. Everything about his posture said control, and everything about his calm said this meeting's outcome was already decided. Leora entered without announcement. 12 heads turned. Seren's turned last, deliberately slow, as if her presence was an inconvenience he had anticipated and already accounted for. "This session is for council members," he said evenly. "This session concerns me," Leora replied. "I will hear what is said about my fate in my own presence rather than through corridors afterward." A murmur rippled around the table. Several elders exchanged glances. One, a heavy-set man named Aldrin, shifted uncomfortably. Another, a sharp-eyed woman named Alara, studied Leora with open curiosity. Serene's expression did not change. "You are welcome to observe. I am here to participate. You hold no title, no rank, no mate bond. On what authority do you participate?" "On the authority of the woman who treated the king's poisoning this morning, while your physicians stood helpless." Silence. The specific silence of a room recalculating. Elder Alara leaned forward. "You treated him?" "Wolf's bane suppression, moonwort and silver binding compound. His organs are stabilized for now. 3 days. Alara's eyes sharpened. "That technique requires mountain training. Marin of the Northern Ridge?" "Yes. Marin has been dead for 6 years. Her students were scattered. You trained with her directly?" "For 3 years before I came to Blackmore." The room shifted. Leora felt it. Not a dramatic reversal, a recalibration. She had entered as the rejected mate. She was now also something else. Someone with knowledge the palace needed. Value that existed independently of any bond or any king's decision. Seren's composure held, but his ring finger turned the black wax band 1/4 rotation. A small movement. She noticed because she had been watching his hands since last night. Steady hands that did not match a court in crisis. "The matter before the council," Seren continued, redirecting with practiced ease, "is the destabilization caused by last night's events. 3 rival alpha territories are represented within our walls. Their presence, provoked by the bond rejection, creates untenable political pressure. The simplest resolution is to remove the catalyst." He did not say her name. He said catalyst, the vocabulary of erasure. With respect, Valdrick's voice came from the doorway where the 3 alphas had positioned themselves, uninvited, unmovable. Detaining or exiling her would confirm weakness, not resolve it. Every territory bordering Blackmore is already sensing instability. Removing the one person who stabilized your king this morning sends a message you cannot afford. Seren's gaze slid to Valdrick. "Alpha Valdrick. This is an internal matter. Nothing that requires 3 visiting alphas to guard a corridor is internal." Theron stepped forward, less diplomatic, more direct. "You want to throw out the woman your king rejected and your assassin targeted in the same night. That is not de-escalation. That is finishing someone else's job for them." The accusation hung in the air. Several elders shifted. Seren's ring turned again. Leora spoke before the room could fracture further. Not loud, not aggressive. with the measured tone of someone who has assessed a situation and decided exactly how much truth to deploy. I have no interest in invoking ancient law. I have no interest in challenging the rejection. I released the claim publicly last night. That is done. Seren's relief was invisible to most. Leora caught it in the way his shoulders dropped 1 millimeter. What I propose, she continued, is strategic cooperation. Last night's assassination was not opportunistic. It was coordinated. The poison was targeted. The timing was surgical. Someone orchestrated that attack knowing exactly when tensions would peak and exactly who to aim at. She let the implication breathe. Did not name Seren. Did not need to. The room was intelligent enough to understand that coordinated attacks require coordinated intelligence. Until the source is identified, removing me from Blackmore does not de-escalate. It removes a target, yes. It also removes the one person whose presence forces whoever is behind this to act again. And when they act again, we can trace them. Silence. Elder Alara spoke first. You are proposing yourself as bait. I am proposing myself as strategic asset. The distinction is thin. The distinction is agency. Bait does not choose. I am choosing. The room absorbed that. Leora felt the weight of 12 gazes measuring her against everything they had assumed about the servant girl who had knelt on marble the night before. She was not what they expected. That was its own kind of power. Seren studied her for a long moment. His expression remained neutral, but something behind his eyes recalculated. She was supposed to be gone by now, humiliated into retreat or exiled by council vote. Instead, she stood in his chamber speaking strategy while 3 rival alphas flanked the doorway and his own elders listened. The council will deliberate, he said finally. The council will include me in its deliberation, Leora replied. She did not ask. She stated. And when no one objected, she pulled a chair to the table and sat down. Theron caught her eye from the doorway. Something flickered across his scarred face that might have been admiration wrapped in hunger. Not the hunger of a man who wants a woman's body. The hunger of a wolf who recognizes an equal and does not know yet whether to fight or follow. That afternoon, Leora walked the market square. Her decision, her terms. The 4 alphas flanked her. Not behind, not in front. Aligned. The visual sent shockwaves through the crowd before a single word was spoken. The newly rejected mate walking through the capital with 4 of the most powerful wolves on the continent positioned around her like cardinal points on a compass, not escorted, not guarded, accompanied. The distinction was everything. Whispers moved through the market like wind through dry grass, some hostile, some calculating, some carrying the particular tone of people witnessing something they do not fully understand but recognize as significant. Leora kept her spine straight. Her wolf, still wounded, still quiet, did not shrink. It paced behind her ribs with the cautious alertness of an animal relearning its territory after a storm. Then a stone flew. It struck the ground near her feet, skittering across cobblestone. Gasps from the nearest merchants. A second stone followed, faster, aimed with intention. A voice from the back of the crowd. Young, male, furious. She is the fracture. She is what is breaking this kingdom. The same words. Again. The assassin's words. Serene's words. Spreading through the population like a planted seed reaching sunlight at the exact moment it was designed to bloom. Leora did not flinch. She did not step behind the wall of alpha dominance that immediately surged around her. Theron's power flared like wildfire. Draven's presence, weakened but still massive, pressed outward from behind her. Valdric's aura solidified the perimeter. Emmerich's gaze swept rooftops with lethal focus, but Leora stepped forward, alone, away from all four of them. She walked toward the stone thrower, a young man, barely 20, face tight with manufactured anger and genuine fear. She stopped close enough to smell both on him, close enough that the crowd could see her face clearly, the calmness in it, the absence of aggression, the steady eyes of a woman who had survived worse than a thrown rock 12 hours ago. "You call me the Fracture," she said. Not loud. Every wolf heard. The young man's jaw worked. His hand still held a third stone. "You are right that something is breaking," she continued. "But fractures cut both ways. The question is not whether I am the crack. The question is what was already weak enough to break." The stone dropped from his hand, not because she commanded it, because her words reached something in him that the anger had been covering. The crowd shifted, murmured. The narrative, carefully constructed by invisible hands to paint her as the source of instability, wobbled on its foundation. Draven stepped to her side, not shielding, standing with her. His dominance rolled outward, not aggressive, stabilizing. The crowd felt the difference. A king who stands beside rather than in front communicates something that thrones cannot. For one held breath, the market was still. And then a woman in the crowd, elderly, silver-haired, holding a basket of bread, inclined her head toward Leora. Not a bow. Recognition. The particular recognition one woman gives another who has endured something publicly and remained standing. Others followed. Not all. Enough. Leora turned to walk back, and the arrow came. From the rooftop of the Eastern Merchant Hall. Fast. Silent. Angled not at any alpha, but at Draven specifically. Aimed at his back while his attention was on the crowd, and his body was positioned beside rather than behind cover. Leora saw it before anyone else because she was facing the direction it came from. Her body responded before her mind finished the calculation. She shoved Draven sideways with both hands. The arrow meant for his spine pierced her left shoulder instead, burying itself 2 inches deep in flesh and muscle. The pain was white, immediate. Wolf's bane blazed through the wound like liquid fire poured directly into the bloodstream. Leora staggered, did not fall. Chaos erupted. Theron's roar split the market square. Valdric's voice cut through panic with surgical precision, directing guards toward the rooftop. Emmerich disappeared upward like smoke flowing in reverse and returned 20 seconds later, dragging the archer down by the throat. Alive. Barely. Draven caught Leora before her knees buckled. His arms closed around her with the desperate strength of a man who has just watched something he is only beginning to understand. He cannot live without taking an arrow that was meant for him. His hands were shaking. The legendary control was gone. Just gone. Replaced by something so raw it had no name except terror. Leora. Not Alpha King. Not ruler. Her name. Only her name. "I am not dying," she said through gritted teeth. The poison burned. Her vision narrowed. But the dose was smaller than the one that hit Draven. She could feel the difference. Her wolf, wounded as it was, rose to fight the toxin with a stubbornness that matched its human half. "That is not negotiable," he said, and his voice shook. The archer, pinned beneath Emmerich's boot on the cobblestones, spat blood and laughed. Orders were to wound her, make him break. He rejects her publicly, but howls when she bleeds. That makes him unstable. That makes him controllable. The strategy laid bare in a dying man's sneer. Use Leora as an emotional weapon. Break the king's composure. Exploit the fracture between rejection and the bond that refused to die. Leora gripped Draven's collar with her uninjured hand, pulled him close enough that her words reached only him. Do not lose control for me. His eyes locked on hers. Feral, terrified, fighting every instinct his wolf was screaming into his blood. I already lost you once, he said. The admission tore through both of them. Not a declaration of love, not a promise. An injury spoken aloud. The kind of truth that leaves the person who says it more exposed than the person who hears it. Around them, the square secured itself through coordinated violence. The archer was subdued. The crowd was contained. Theron returned with blood on his hands, and information extracted through methods that no one questioned. Valdric established perimeter lines with the efficiency of a man who finds comfort in containment protocols. Emmerich cataloged evidence, angles, poison concentrations. But in the center of all of it, Draven held Leora with her blood soaking into his shirt and his scent wrapping around her pain like something trying to hold shattered glass together. The mark on his throat was inches from her face. Isolde's claim. Fresh. Undeniable. It burned her eyes. And beneath it, beneath the blood and the wrongness and the evidence of his worst decision, she could still smell him. Storm and cedar and the thing her bones would never stop recognizing no matter how many times her pride demanded they forget. She pushed against his chest with her good hand. Created distance. The distance hurt worse than the arrow. Get me to healers, she said, and get that archer talking before whoever sent him can send another. Draven released her slowly. His hands did not want to open. When they did, his fingers stayed extended toward her for one extra second, reaching for something that was no longer there. Theron stepped closer. His expression was controlled fury and something that looked almost like tenderness beaten into the shape of protectiveness. You took an arrow for him. It was tactical, she said. His gaze burned into hers. It did not smell tactical. Heat climbed her spine despite the pain, despite the poison, despite everything logical in her body telling her that now was not the moment for anything except survival. Emmerich joined them, voice measured but eyes sharp. The assassination attempts are escalating in coordination. Whoever is behind this anticipated the market appearance. They had assets in position. This is not reactive violence. This is a campaign. Valdric nodded once. And the common thread in both attacks is not the method. It is the target selection. They are not trying to kill her efficiently. They are trying to wound her visibly, in his presence, to trigger his response. The logic was elegant and terrible. Leora was not the target. She was the weapon, aimed at Draven's emotional stability, aimed at the crack between his duty and his bond. Aimed at the exact place where a king becomes a man and a man becomes vulnerable. And the person who understood that crack well enough to exploit it had to be someone inside Blackmore. Someone who had watched the bond ignite and the rejection unfold and calculated precisely how to weaponize both. Leora thought of steady hands turning a black wax ring. Thought of the phrase fracture point appearing on the lips of assassins and in the chambers of councils. Thought of Elder Seren's daughter marked on a king's throat and Elder Seren's calm in a palace full of chaos. The thread was tightening. She could feel it. Not proof yet. Not enough to speak aloud without being dismissed as a rejected mate grasping for blame. But the pattern was there, beneath the surface, the way cracks run through foundation stones long before the wall comes down. I need to speak with Isolde, she said. All four alphas reacted. Draven's head turned sharply. Theron's eyebrows rose. Valdric's gaze sharpened. Emmerich smiled with the slow satisfaction of someone watching a chess player make the move he had been waiting for. "The woman he marked," Theron said flatly. "You want to speak with the woman he marked?" "Yes." "Why?" Because Leora had seen something in the ceremony that no one else had been positioned to see. In the moment before Draven bit Isolde's throat, in the half-second before ecstasy replaced everything else on Isolde's face, there had been something else there first, brief, involuntary, swallowed before it could fully form. Fear, not the fear of pain, not the nervousness of a public ritual, the specific, cornered fear of someone who is doing what they were told and is terrified of what happens if they do not. Leora had recognized it because she had seen the same fear on a servant girl's face in a dark alcove the night before. "Because I do not think she chose this either," Leora said quietly, and the corridor went very still as the implication of those words settled into the bones of every wolf present. If Isolde had not chosen the bond, then the bond was not a choice. It was a placement, a political installation disguised as a sacred ceremony. And the man who had placed his daughter on the king's throat like a crown he intended to control was sitting in the council chamber right now, turning his black wax ring, waiting for the fracture he had engineered to finish its work. Leora's shoulder burned with poison. Her chest ached with phantom bond pain. Her wolf stirred, not healed, not whole, but rising. And somewhere in the east wing of Blackmoor, behind a door that smelled like expensive perfume and quiet weeping, Isolde sat alone, with a mark on her throat that was already beginning to fade, and a secret in her chest that could unravel everything. She found Isolde in the east wing chamber that smelled like wilting gardenias and salt. The door was unlocked. That surprised Leora. A newly marked Luna should have guards, attendants, ceremonial preparations filling every hour of the day following the bite. Instead, Isolde sat alone on the edge of an unmade bed, still wearing the gown from last night, still carrying the scent of blood and ritual on her skin. Her fingers pressed against the mark on her throat, not with pride, with the careful, repetitive pressure of someone checking whether a wound is still there or whether they imagined it. The mark was fading. Leora saw it immediately. What should have been a permanent bond scar, dark and vivid and pulsing with the shared heartbeat of two mated wolves, had already begun to pale at the edges. The center still held color, but the outer lines were blurring, dissolving, retreating into skin that was rejecting what had been forced upon it. Bond marks do not fade, not real ones. Isolde looked up when Leora entered. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, but the expression beneath the exhaustion was not hostility. It was the hollow, glassy stare of someone who has been waiting for the next terrible thing and has stopped being surprised when it arrives. "You came," Isolde said. Her voice was thin, paper over glass. "You expected me?" "I expected someone." A pause. "I hoped it would be you." Leora closed the door behind her. The room contracted. Two women. One mark. One bond that should have been between them and the same man, except neither of them had been given the choice they deserved. "Show me," Leora said quietly. Isolde's hand dropped from her throat. The mark was worse than Leora had estimated from across the room. The edges were not just fading. They were inflamed, red, irritated. The skin around the bite had begun to swell with the kind of rejection response that only occurs when a bond is fundamentally incompatible. When the wolf beneath the skin recognizes that the mark does not belong and begins fighting to expel it like a body rejecting a transplanted organ. "It started burning this morning," Isolde whispered. "The physicians said it was normal, settling, but I can feel it. My wolf is pushing it out. Because the bond is not real." The words fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. Isolde's eyes filled, not with surprise, with the specific devastation of hearing someone say aloud the thing you have been screaming inside your own head for weeks. "My father," Isolde said. The two words carried the weight of a confession that had been locked behind ribs for longer than one night. "He arranged everything. The timing, the political pressure on Draven, the council votes that made choosing me the only option that did not fracture alliances." Her voice broke on the next sentence. "He told me if I refused, he would send my brother Callum to the border outpost, the one that lost 12 wolves last winter. Callum is 14. Leora's chest tightened, not with anger toward Isolde, with recognition. The servant girl in the alcove, Isolde in this room. Different cages, same architecture, power wielded through the people you love, compliance purchased with threats you cannot afford to test. "You did not want the bond," Leora said. Not a question. "I did not want any of it." Tears spilled down Isolde's cheeks. "I saw your face when he bit me. I saw you break. I wanted to scream at him to stop, but my father was watching from the third row. He had his hand on Callum's shoulder, squeezing. I could see the pressure from the dais." The image crystallized with sickening clarity. A ceremony that looked like sacred tradition was a puppet theater. Seren holding his son's shoulder. Isolde watching her father's grip and performing ecstasy while her wolf howled in protest beneath her skin. Draven biting a woman he believed he was choosing freely, while every condition of that choice had been engineered by the man sitting 3 rows back with a black wax ring and steady hands. "He planned the assassination too," Leora said. Isolde's eyes widened, then closed. A long, shuddering exhale that sounded like the last wall collapsing. "I found a letter in his study 3 days before the ceremony, sealed in black wax." Leora's pulse quickened. "What did it say?" "Instructions. To someone outside the territory. Specific details about the ceremony timing, the courtyard layout, the position of guards during the celebration, and a phrase at the bottom that I did not understand then." Isolde's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Remove the fracture point. Ensure maximum visibility. Maximum visibility." The assassination attempts had not been designed to kill efficiently. They had been designed to wound Leora publicly, in Draven's presence, to trigger his emotional response and prove to the Council and the territories that the Alpha King was compromised, unstable, controllable. Seren had built a machine. Isolde was one gear, Leora was another. Draven's bond, his guilt, his cracking composure, all of it was fuel for an engine designed to do one thing: concentrate power in the hands of the man sitting behind the throne, turning his ring, waiting for the fracture he had spent months engineering. "I need that letter," Leora said. "It is gone. He burned it the morning after the ceremony. I watched the ash fall. Then I need you, your testimony, before the council." Fear flooded Isolde's face. Raw, animal fear. "He will send Callum to the border. He promised. If I speak, my brother dies." Leora reached across the space between them and took Isolde's hand. The gesture was deliberate, gentle, The same hands that had bandaged a servant girl's wrist last night. The same instinct. "I will not let that happen," Leora said. "How can you promise that? You hold no title, no power. I hold the attention of 4 alpha wolves, and I hold something your father did not account for. The willingness of 2 women he used as pawns to stop playing his game." Something shifted in Isolde's expression. The fear did not vanish, but beneath it, something harder surfaced. The particular hardness that forms when a person who has been controlled their entire life glimpses, for the first time, the possibility that compliance is not the only option. Isolde squeezed Leora's hand back. "What do you need me to do?" "Not yet. Not today. When I ask, I will have already secured Callum. Your father will have no leverage left, and when you speak, it will be because you chose to, not because anyone forced you." The promise hung between them. Fragile, necessary. Leora stood, moved toward the door, paused. "Isolde." "Yes?" "The mark will continue to fade. When it does, the bond dissolves completely. You will feel pain, disorientation. It will pass. And Draven? He will feel it too. He will have to decide what that means." She left Isolde in the room with the wilting gardenias and the fading mark and the terrible knowledge that her father had turned a sacred ceremony into a political weapon. The corridor outside was empty. The palace hummed with the controlled tension of a building that knows something is wrong but has not yet identified what. Leora walked 14 steps before the hand closed over her mouth from behind. She did not scream. There was no time. A cloth pressed against her nose, sweet and chemical, and the world tilted sideways. Her wolf surged, panicked, fighting the sedative with everything it had. She bit down on the hand, tasted blood, heard a grunt of pain. But the dosage was calculated for her weight, her weakened state, the wolf's bane still thinning her blood from the arrow wound, and her vision darkened at the edges like a candle being slowly smothered. The last thing she saw before consciousness collapsed was a ring, black wax, on the hand that held the cloth. Seren's hand, steady as ever. She woke in darkness, stone walls, damp air. The particular cold of underground spaces that never see sunlight. A cellar beneath the palace, old, unused. The kind of space that exists in ancient buildings between official rooms, forgotten by everyone except the man who built his career on knowing where every shadow fell. Her wrists were bound, not with rope, with iron cuffs bolted to the wall, old restraints from an era when Blackmore kept prisoners beneath its foundation. The metal was cold against her skin. Her shoulder wound throbbed. The wolf's bane in her system made every sensation sharper, crueler, more immediate. Carved into the stone wall opposite her, scratched with a blade that had been dragged across rock with deliberate pressure, were words. "The rejected have no place in history." Seren's handwriting. She recognized it from the council documents she had served tea beside for 3 years. The precise, angular letters of a man who believed his penmanship reflected his authority. He had planned this room for her, not as an improvisation, as a contingency. If the assassination failed, if the council vote failed, if she proved too stubborn, too visible, too central to remove through politics or poison, then this cellar waited, patient, prepared. Leora pulled against the cuffs. The iron held. Her wolf clawed at the inside of her chest, but the sedative and the wolf's bane combined had suppressed it to a whisper. She could not shift, could not summon the strength that lived beneath her human skin. She was alone, truly alone. No alphas outside the door, No bond pulling someone toward her. No one who knew where she was. The panic came. She let it. Felt it surge and crest and crash against her ribs like a wave hitting rock. Counted to 7. Breathed. Counted again. Then she began to think. Theron had taught her to fight with her body. But he had also taught her something else. When you cannot overpower the cage, study the cage. Every lock has a mechanism. Every wall has a seam. Every captor makes one assumption that, if identified, becomes the door they forgot to close. Seren's assumption was that she was alone. But Leora had spent 3 years in this palace. She knew the servant corridors. She knew the old architecture. And she knew that the cellar she was in connected, through a passage bricked over 2 decades ago, to the kitchen storage tunnels. The same tunnels the servant girl from the alcove used every night to bring water for the upper floors. Emmerich had told her something during their corridor conversations that she had stored without fully understanding its value at the time. I keep eyes in places that powerful men consider beneath their attention. Kitchens, laundry rooms, servant quarters. Power forgets that the people who carry its meals also carry its secrets. The girl from the alcove. The girl Leora had protected. The girl whose bruised wrist she had bandaged with a strip torn from her own dress. That girl was one of Emmerich's network. Leora did not know if the girl was near. Did not know if the passage was accessible. Did not know if Emmerich had anticipated this specific contingency, or if the pieces were aligning through nothing more than the accumulated weight of small kindnesses returning at the moment they were needed most. She closed her eyes, listened. The cellar was not silent. Water dripped somewhere to her left. Air moved faintly from a direction that did not match the door. And beneath the stone, so soft it might have been imagination, footsteps. Light. Quick. The footsteps of someone who had learned to move through dark spaces without being heard. A section of the wall shifted. Not the door. The bricked-over passage. Mortar crumbled. A stone slid inward. And through the gap, small enough to fit through sideways, a face appeared. Dark eyes. Wide. Frightened. Determined. The servant girl held a kitchen knife in one hand and an iron key in the other. The key was old, blackened with age, the kind of key that opens things people have forgotten exist. "I heard them bring you down," the girl whispered. "I was in the tunnels. I always use the tunnels." "How did you get the key?" "Emmerich. He gave it to me weeks ago. Told me to keep it. Told me someday someone important would need a door opened in the dark." Leora's chest expanded with something that was not relief exactly. It was the recognition that every small act she had made, every moment she had chosen to stop and help and see and care, had been quietly building a structure she could not see. A structure made not of power or politics, but of people. The servant girl she had protected. Emmerich's network she had earned access to by being someone worth investing in. Theron's combat training. Valdrick's strategic knowledge. The compound she had administered to Draven. The herbs she had learned from Marin on a mountain 6 years ago. Every thread, every kindness, every skill earned through years of being no one important. All of it converging in a dark cellar on the second day of 3. The key turned in the cuffs. The iron fell away. Leora's wrists were raw. Her shoulder bled fresh. Her wolf was a whisper. But she was free. Not rescued. Free by the accumulation of her own choices returning to her in the dark. She took the girl's hand. They moved through the passage together. 2 women navigating stone corridors that powerful men had forgotten existed. Above them, the palace hummed with a crisis that had not yet discovered her absence. Ahead of her, A confrontation that would require every piece of evidence, every ally, every ounce of composure she had left. She emerged into the kitchen corridor 12 minutes later, covered in dust and old mortar, shoulder bleeding through the bandage, wrists ringed with iron bruises, and carrying in her chest the cold, clear certainty that Elder Seren had made his final miscalculation. He had assumed the rejected mate would stay in the cage. He had forgotten that the woman he put there had spent her entire life learning how to survive places that were not designed for her. Emmerich was waiting at the corridor junction, not surprised, not relieved, expectant, as if he had been counting the minutes since her disappearance and had calculated, with his particular precision, exactly how long it would take her to find her own way out. 14 minutes, he said. I estimated 12. The passage was narrower than anticipated. His smile was slow, real, the kind of smile he did not give to political allies or strategic assets, but to people who had genuinely impressed him. Draven is tearing the palace apart looking for you, he said. Let him look a moment longer. Why? Leora straightened her spine, brushed the dust from her arms, felt the iron bruises on her wrists and let them settle into her skin like evidence she would carry willingly. Because when I walk into that room, I am not walking in as someone who was rescued. I am walking in as someone who came back, and I need him to see the difference. She found Draven in the council chamber. He had overturned the table. Chairs lay scattered like casualties. Orath stood at the door looking like a man who had tried to contain a hurricane and been told to try harder. Theron was mid-argument with 2 guards. Valdric was coordinating a systematic search of every room in the East Wing. The panic in the room was real, visceral, and entirely centered on her absence. Draven stood at the far wall, half-shifted, claws out, eyes golden with wolf light. The poison was accelerating his instability, and her disappearance had shattered whatever fragile control remained. He looked like a man standing on the edge of something irreversible. Then she stepped through the door. Every wolf in the room froze. Draven's eyes found her. The gold receded. The claws retracted slowly. His chest heaved with the effort of pulling his wolf back from the edge. He stared at her, at the dust on her clothes, at the blood on her shoulder, at the iron bruises on her wrists. Who? He said. One word, barely human. She did not answer the question. Instead, she walked to him, slowly, deliberately, stopped within arm's reach, close enough that her scent wrapped around him and his wolf went quiet, not calm, but listening. I do not need you to rescue me, she said. I need you to choose correctly this time. His breathing steadied. 1 degree at a time. The gold faded from his eyes. The man returned. Damaged. Terrified. Present. Serene, he said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a king finally seeing the puppet strings that had been attached to his hands. Leora nodded once. Then we end this, he said. No. She met his gaze without flinching. I end this. You stand beside me when I do. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every shift that had occurred since the ceremony. She had entered this palace as a servant. She had been rejected as a mate. She had been targeted as a threat. And now she stood in the wreckage of a council chamber, covered in cellar dust and her own blood, telling an alpha king that the next move belonged to her. Draven looked at her for a long time. Something moved behind his eyes that was deeper than desire and more painful than regret. Recognition, not of a mate bond, of a person, of who she had been all along while he was busy choosing wrong. "Beside you," he said quietly, and for the first time since the ceremony, Leora believed him. She did not wait for morning. The palace was still processing her reappearance when Leora sent word to every elder, every territorial representative, every wolf of rank within Blackmoor's walls. Council session, immediate, mandatory attendance. The messenger who carried her summons hesitated at the word mandatory because the woman issuing it held no title, no rank, no bond, and no official authority of any kind. Leora looked at him and said, "Tell them the woman who treated their king's poisoning, survived 2 assassination attempts, and escaped a cellar imprisonment has information that determines whether this kingdom stands or falls by sunrise. Then let them decide if mandatory offends them." Every seat was filled within the hour. The council chamber had been reassembled. The overturned table righted. The scattered chairs returned to position. But the room still carried the scent of Draven's half-shift, the ozone and iron tang of an alpha wolf pushed to its edge, and that scent lingered in the stone like a warning written in chemistry rather than language. 12 elders sat around the oval table. Elder Seren occupied his usual position at the advisory seat, closest to the head. His posture was immaculate. His silver hair was combed with the precision of a man who understood that appearance is the first argument. His black wax ring sat heavy on his right hand, and his face carried the composed neutrality of someone who has prepared for every contingency. Except one. He had not prepared for Leora to come back. She entered the chamber without announcement, without escort, without the particular theater of power that Blackmoor's politics demanded. She simply walked through the door and stood at the head of the table, standing, not sitting. The position of someone who intends to deliver a verdict rather than participate in a discussion. Behind her, Draven entered. Not first, behind. The visual alone sent a tremor through the room. The Alpha King positioning himself as support rather than authority. Theron followed, massive, scarred, standing against the eastern wall with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on Seren with the unwavering focus of a predator who has identified prey. Valdric took the western wall, hands clasped behind his back, the strategic anchor. Emmerich leaned in the doorway, blocking the only exit with the casual elegance of a man who wanted everyone to understand that leaving was no longer an option. 4 alphas. 1 woman at the head of the table. 12 elders about to learn that the foundation beneath their seats had been mined by one of their own. Seren's gaze moved across the room, calculating positions, measuring the shift in alignment. His ring finger turned 1/4 rotation, the tell Leora had been cataloging since the ceremony. "This is irregular," he said evenly. "Council sessions require formal petition and 48 hours notice. Assassination attempts on the Alpha King's fated mate require immediate address," Leora replied. "Or does the council prefer to schedule its emergencies?" A murmur circled the table. Elder Alara, the sharp-eyed woman who had recognized Leora's mountain training, leaned forward with open interest. Elder Aldrin shifted uncomfortably. The others arranged their expressions along a spectrum between curiosity and calculation. "You claim the title of fated mate," Seren observed. "A claim that was publicly dissolved when the king marked another. I claim the title of the woman someone in this room has been trying to kill for the past 48 hours. That title requires no bond to validate." The words landed with surgical precision. Seren's composure held, but Leora was watching his hands. She was always watching his hands. And the ring turned again. She began, Not with accusation, not with emotion, with evidence. 2 nights ago, an assassin breached the palace courtyard during the ceremony aftermath and targeted me specifically. The assassin used Wolf's Bane, manufactured in a concentration available only through controlled palace dispensaries. Before dying by suicide capsule, the assassin used a phrase. "She is the fracture point." She paused. Let the room absorb. Yesterday, a second archer targeted both myself and the Alpha King in the market square. The archer was captured alive and confirmed under questioning that orders were to wound me visibly in Draven's presence. The strategic objective was to trigger emotional instability in the king, destabilizing his authority and creating justification for council intervention. Another pause, another breath of silence. This morning, I was abducted within the palace itself, sedated with a compound applied by hand, taken to a cellar beneath the east wing that has not appeared on any official palace schematic in 20 years. A cellar that was prepared in advance with restraints and a message carved into the wall. She reached into the pocket of her borrowed clothing and placed something on the table. A piece of stone, small, rough-edged, broken from the cellar wall. Carved into its surface in precise, angular handwriting were the words, "The rejected have no place in history." "I recognize this handwriting," Leora said calmly. "I have served tea beside council documents for 3 years. I have filed reports, transcribed minutes, organized correspondence. I know every elder's script by sight." She did not look at Seren. She did not need to. Every other elder at the table was already looking at him, because every other elder at the table had spent years reading his precise, angular letters on council memoranda. The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was the silence of 12 minds arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously, and understanding that the conclusion changed everything. Seren rose from his chair, slowly, with the deliberate calm of a man who has been cornered before and survived by controlling the narrative. "This is the accusation of a rejected female," he said, wounded, emotionally compromised, seeking to assign blame for her own misfortune to the nearest available target. The council should consider the source before it considers the claim. His voice was measured, reasonable, pitched to the frequency that had guided Blackmore's politics for 2 decades. The frequency of a man who understood that authority is not volume, but certainty. Leora felt the room waver. He was good. He was practiced. And the argument was designed to exploit the one vulnerability she could not eliminate. Her status. The rejected mate. The woman scorned. The easiest narrative in the world to weaponize against her. She had prepared for this. "I anticipated that response," she said, "which is why I did not come alone." The chamber door opened behind Emmerich, who stepped aside with a grace that turned the movement into theater. Isolde entered. The reaction was immediate. Chairs scraped. Breath caught. Serene's composure cracked for the first time, a fracture so brief that only Leora and Draven caught it, visible in the way his fingers stopped turning the ring and went still. Isolde looked different from the woman Leora had found in the wilting gardenia room. She was pale, exhausted. The mark on her throat was visibly faded, the edges nearly translucent against her skin. But she stood straight. Her eyes were clear. And when she looked at her father across the length of the council table, she did not look away. "The bond is failing," Isolde said. Her voice was thin but steady. "It was never real. My wolf has been rejecting the mark since the moment it was placed." Seren's voice hardened. "Isolde, sit down." "No." The single word dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. Isolde's hands were shaking. Her entire body trembled with the effort of defying the man who had controlled every aspect of her existence for 23 years. But she did not sit. My father arranged the bonding, she continued. He pressured Draven through council votes he had been engineering for months. He threatened my brother Callum with reassignment to the border outpost if I refused to cooperate. He placed me on that dais knowing the bond was incompatible. He watched his daughter be bitten by a man she was not mated to and considered it a successful strategy. Tears ran down her face. She did not wipe them. She let them fall in full view of 12 elders who had watched her marked 2 nights ago and celebrated what they believed was a sacred union. I found a letter in his study 3 days before the ceremony, sealed in black wax. It contained instructions for someone outside the territory, ceremony timing, courtyard layout, guard positions, and a directive at the bottom. Her voice dropped. Remove the fracture point. Ensure maximum visibility. The room detonated, not with noise, with understanding. 12 elders recalculating everything they had witnessed in the past 48 hours through the lens of a single architect who had been building this machine for months. Seren moved. Not toward the door. He was too intelligent for that, and Emmerich's position made escape impossible. He moved toward control, toward the narrative. My daughter is confused, he said, voice carrying the particular warmth of paternal concern. The bond rejection has caused psychological distress. She requires rest, not a platform for... I have testimony from the servant network, Emmerich interrupted from the doorway. His voice was silk, drawn across steel. 3 palace staff members witnessed Elder Seren meeting with an unidentified courier 48 hours before the ceremony. The courier matched the physical description of the assassin who died in the courtyard. Baldric spoke next from the western wall. Financial records from the Eastern Ridge supply chain show a series of anonymous purchases for concentrated wolf's bane routed through a merchant house that Elder Seren has maintained a private account with for 11 years. Theron's contribution was simpler. He placed a blood-stained cloth on the table. The second archer, before my methods concluded his interview, confirmed that his contract originated through a broker known only by a sigil, a circle of black wax. 3 pieces of evidence, 3 sources, 3 angles of corroboration that transformed Leora's accusation from the grievance of a rejected mate into a case that even the most sympathetic elder could not dismiss. Seren's ring finger stopped moving entirely. The room watched him the way a room watches a wall beginning to lean, not yet fallen, but the angle had changed and gravity was no longer negotiable. He tried once more, the final play of a man whose playbook has run out of pages. Even if these accusations held merit, he said, the removal of the rejected mate remains the most stabilizing action available. The territories, Leora cut in, and her voice carried something new, something that had been forged in cellars and corridors and courtyard chaos and the accumulated weight of every moment she had refused to break, are represented in this room by 3 alphas who followed me here, who guarded my door, who fought at my side, who chose alignment not because I held a bond or a title, but because I held value. She stepped forward, not aggressive, deliberate, each step measured, each step earning the ground it covered. You called me the fracture point, Elder Seren. You built your entire strategy on the assumption that removing me would restore stability. You engineered a false bond. You commissioned assassinations. You imprisoned me in a cellar you had prepared weeks in advance. All because you believed that a rejected mate was the weakest piece on the board. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the age lines carved into his face by decades of manipulation, close enough to smell the stale scent of adrenaline beneath his composed exterior, the scent of a man whose body knows it has lost, even while his mind continues to argue. "You were wrong," she said. "I am not the fracture. I am the axis, and you just spent 2 days proving it to everyone in this room." Seren's composure broke, not gradually, not with the measured retreat of a politician accepting defeat. It shattered the way ice shatters when the temperature changes too fast, all at once from every direction, along fault lines that had been invisible until the moment they became everything. He lunged, not toward the door, toward Leora. His hand found the ceremonial blade that every elder wore at the hip, a decorative weapon that had not been drawn in council chambers for a century. It cleared the sheath with a sound that was too sharp for a room that had been operating in words rather than steel. He grabbed Leora's arm and pulled her against him. The blade pressed to her throat. The edge was real. The danger was immediate. The scent of his fear was overwhelming now, sour and metallic and radiating from every pore. "No one moves," he snarled. The composure was gone. The measured voice was gone. Underneath it was something desperate and cornered and willing to burn everything, rather than be the one who falls. The room crystallized into frozen threat. Theron's wolf erupted to the surface, shifting his features, claws sliding from knuckles. Draven's dominance slammed outward so hard the windows rattled. Valdric's hand found his blade. Emmerich coiled in the doorway like a snake deciding where to strike, but the blade was at Leora's throat. Any movement, any surge, any miscalculation of an inch would open her carotid and end everything before anyone could close the distance. Seren's breath was ragged against her ear. "You are nothing," he hissed. "A servant, an orphan, a woman no king wanted enough to keep. And you think you can dismantle what I have built?" Leora felt the blade's edge against her skin, cold, thin, one twitch of pressure from drawing blood. Her heart hammered. The wolf's bane in her system made every sensation sharper, every nerve more exposed. Fear rose in her chest like floodwater, real, animal fear, the kind that makes hands shake and vision narrow and the body scream for flight. She let the fear come, let it peak, let it crash. Then she thought of Theron, his voice during their training sessions, rough with experience, patient with repetition. When you cannot overpower, redirect. Every grip has a weakness. Every hold has a hinge. Find the hinge. She thought of the servant girl in the alcove, the way fear looked on someone else's face, and how she had chosen to step into it rather than away. She thought of Emmerich's words. Power forgets that the people who carry its meals also carry its secrets. She found the hinge. Serene's grip on her arm was high, near the shoulder. His body was pressed against her back. The blade was at her throat, held in his right hand. His left hand anchored her arm. The weakness was the angle. He was taller, which meant the blade pressed downward. If she dropped her weight suddenly, the geometry changed. The blade would lose contact for a fraction of a second, as his arm adjusted to her new position. A fraction of a second was enough. She dropped, not gradually, completely. Dead weight. Her knees buckled deliberately, and her body plummeted toward the floor with a speed that Seren's grip could not compensate for. The blade slid across empty air where her throat had been. His left hand lost its anchor on her arm. She twisted as she fell, grabbed his wrist, the one holding the blade. used the momentum of her drop to torque his arm against its natural rotation. He yelped. The sound was undignified and involuntary and deeply satisfying. The blade clattered to the stone floor. Leora did not stop. She drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus with the full force of a woman who had been carrying rage in her chest for 2 days and finally had a legitimate target. He doubled over. She swept his ankle. He hit the floor with a sound that echoed through the chamber like punctuation. And then she stood over him, not shaking, not panting, standing with the calm of someone who has discovered that the worst thing they feared was not as large as the space they had made inside themselves to survive it. The chamber was silent. 12 elders stared. 4 alphas held their positions, frozen not by threat now, but by something else. Recognition. The particular recognition that occurs when a room full of dominant wolves watches a woman with no supernatural strength, no shifted form, no alpha aura take down a man who held a blade to her throat using nothing but technique and nerve and the refusal to be a victim one more time. Draven's face was unreadable. No, that was not accurate. His face was entirely readable. It was saying one thing, loudly, in a language that required no words. He was looking at her as if he had never seen her before, as if every assumption he had ever made about power and worth and what it meant to be strong was rearranging itself around the woman standing over a fallen elder with iron bruises on her wrists and blood on her shoulder and absolutely no apology in her eyes. Theron exhaled slowly, a sound that carried something between admiration and the sudden, uncomfortable recognition that the woman he had been training to fight had just proved she did not need him to. Emmerich smiled. The real smile. The one he kept locked behind strategy and velvet. "Oh," he said quietly to no one in particular, "she is magnificent." Valdric said nothing, but he looked at Leora with the expression of a man who has spent his entire life studying power and has just watched it redefined. Serene lay on the floor, gasping. The black wax ring had cracked against the stone when he fell. The 2 halves sat on the marble like a broken seal on a letter that could never be resealed. Leora looked down at him and felt something she had not expected. Not rage, not triumph, clarity. "Get up," she said. He did not move. "I said, get up. You do not get to lie on this floor. That privilege was mine 2 nights ago, when your daughter's forced bond dropped me to my knees in front of a kingdom. Get up and face what you built." He rose, slowly, painfully. The composure was irretrievable. His silver hair was displaced. His robes were twisted. His hands, those steady, steady hands, were trembling. Leora turned to the council. "The evidence has been presented. The confession was provided by his own daughter. The corroboration comes from 3 independent alpha territories. You have heard what this man did. Now you will decide what happens to him." Elder Alara spoke first. "The council recognizes the severity of these charges. Conspiracy against the crown, engineering a false sacred bond, commissioning assassination of a fated mate, imprisonment of a free wolf. These are capital offenses." "Capital," Siren whispered. The word aged him 10 years in a second. Leora raised her hand. The room stilled. "I do not want his death." Surprise rippled through the chamber. Draven's brow furrowed. Theron's expression hardened. Even Emmerich tilted his head, recalculating. "Death is an ending," Leora said. "It is quick. It is merciful in its finality, and it allows him to become a cautionary tale that people forget within a generation." She stepped closer to Seren. close enough that her next words were for him, even as the room heard every syllable. I want him stripped of title, stripped of elder rank, stripped of every privilege he accumulated through decades of manipulation. I want him reassigned to palace labor, permanent, visible. She paused. Let the image form. I want him on his knees every morning in the great hall of Blackmore, scrubbing the marble floor where I fell when his engineered bond broke my heart in front of a kingdom. I want him to clean the stone where my knee struck. I want him to polish the tile where my humiliation stained the air. I want him to do it every day, in full view of the court, until his hands know that floor as intimately as I know the memory of falling on it. The room was so quiet that the sound of Seren's breathing was the loudest thing in the chamber. Poetic justice, not quick, not merciful, proportional, the kind of punishment that does not end with a body, but continues with a life reduced to the dimensions of the suffering it caused. Elder Alara looked around the table. The council votes, all in favor of the sentence as proposed. 12 hands rose, not 11, 12, unanimous. Seren's legs gave out. He knelt on the very floor he had been sentenced to clean, his trembling hands pressed against marble as if searching for the steadiness that had defined him for decades and finding nothing but cold stone. Leora did not watch him fall. She turned to Isolde, who stood at the back of the chamber, with tears streaming silently down her face and a mark on her throat that was now almost invisible. Callum, Isolde whispered. My brother. Leora nodded. Emmerich. Emmerich straightened from the doorway. Already done. Callum was relocated from the border outpost 4 hours ago. He is currently in the Western Guardhouse under Valdrick's protection. He has been told his sister is safe. Isolde's knees buckled, not from weakness, from relief so profound that her body could not contain it, standing up. Leora crossed the room and caught her, held her. 2 women who had been placed on opposite sides of a man's ambition, one marked, one rejected, both used, standing together in the wreckage of the machine that had consumed them both. Isolde gripped Leora's arms and looked at her with an expression that Leora would carry for years, gratitude that went deeper than politics or bond rivalry, or the complicated geometry of loving and losing the same man. You owe me nothing, Leora said softly. You were a prisoner too. Isolde shook her head. I owe you everything, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing that the woman my father tried to destroy was the one who freed me. Behind them, the bond mark on Isolde's throat flickered once and went dark. The false bond dissolved completely, releasing a small shockwave of psychic energy that rippled through the room. Draven staggered, caught himself on the table edge. His face went white, not from pain, from the sudden, disorienting absence of something that had been occupying space in his chest for 2 days. A bond that was never his, a mark that was never real, a choice that was never free. He looked at Isolde, looked at the place on her throat where his bite had been, and now was not. Looked at his own hands. I did that to you, he said. His voice was stripped, bare, not king, not alpha. A man confronting the full weight of what his compliance had cost 2 women. Isolde met his gaze with a steadiness that surprised everyone, including herself. You were manipulated, but you also did not question. Remember both. It was not forgiveness. It was truth delivered without cruelty. And truth without cruelty was the most generous thing she could have given him. The council session dissolved into the organized chaos of aftermath. Guards took Seren into custody. Territorial representatives began recalibrating alliances. Elders who had spent 2 days watching from the sidelines suddenly found their voices, speaking urgently about stability and unity and the need for visible solidarity. But the real war had not ended. It had clarified. Seren's network of minor pack alliances, the coalition he had built in the shadows to support his bid for power behind the throne, did not dissolve with his arrest. They activated. Within hours, the eastern border reported organized aggression, patrol units ambushed, supply lines cut. A coordinated military response by wolves who had been promised a new order and now fought with the desperate fury of those who understood that their patron's fall meant their own. The war lasted 3 nights. It was not a grand, theatrical conflict of massive armies clashing on open plains. It was fast, brutal, surgical, forest skirmishes, supply chain sabotage, targeted strikes on communication lines, the kind of war fought by desperate factions who know they cannot win through force and instead try to create enough chaos to negotiate survival. Leora rode at the front of the second flank, not as ornament, not as symbol, as tactician. Valdric had reviewed her strategic proposals the morning they deployed and made exactly one adjustment, a minor repositioning of the eastern scouts that improved coverage by 12%. The rest he approved without modification. When Theron asked him why, Valdric replied, "Because her plan is better than mine, and ego is a luxury we cannot afford." She wore no armor. She carried no blade. The scar on her shoulder, still healing, still visible beneath the fabric of her riding clothes, caught torchlight as they moved through the forest corridor toward the first engagement. The wolves who rode behind her saw it, a wound taken for their king, a mark earned in blood that no ceremony had granted and no elder had sanctioned. It became symbol before she intended it to. The scar of the rejected mate who rode to war anyway. Draven rode beside her, not ahead, beside. Their horses matched stride, and the visual communicated something that neither of them needed to articulate. 2 forces in parallel, equal pace, equal risk. On the second night, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines. The minor pack forces had retreated to a fortified position near the eastern ridge, and the final engagement would come with morning. Around them, wolves sharpened blades and checked wounds and tried to sleep in the particular way that soldiers sleep before a battle. They are not certain they will survive. Draven came to her tent. He did not enter. He stood outside the canvas flap with the careful distance of a man who has learned that proximity is something to be earned rather than assumed. "If tomorrow goes wrong," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. Do not give me a deathbed confession while you are still breathing." The faintest curve of his lips, not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The first time in 3 days that his face had attempted anything resembling lightness. "I am not confessing," he said. "I am correcting. Every decision I made from the night of the blood moon until now was built on the belief that strength meant choosing what was hardest, that sacrifice meant giving up what mattered most, that a king who wanted something for himself was a king who had already failed." He paused. The firelight caught the angles of his face. The mark on his throat where Isolde's bite had been was gone completely. Just skin. Just him. "I was wrong. Strength is not sacrifice. It is discernment. Knowing what to protect and having the courage to protect it even when the cost is visible. Even when it looks like weakness to everyone watching. Even when the woman you should have chosen is riding beside you into a war that your own blindness helped create." Leora listened, did not interrupt, did not soften. Let his words land where they landed and settle into the spaces between everything that had happened. "You do not get to rewrite the corridor," she said finally. "You do not get to go back to that night and undo the turn of your back. I know. And tomorrow, if we survive, you do not get to mark me as reward for bravery or claim me as spoils of victory. I know that too. Then what are you asking for?" He was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked. Wind moved through pine needles with the sound of something vast and patient. "The chance to stand beside you," he said, "not as your king, not as your mate, as the man who chose wrong and wants to spend whatever time remains choosing correctly." She studied his face in the firelight, searched for calculation, found none, found fear, which was better, because fear meant the outcome mattered to him. Fear meant he understood that her answer was not guaranteed and that the uncertainty was something he was willing to carry. "Tomorrow," she said, "survive first, earn second." He nodded, stepped back, turned to leave. "Draven." He stopped. "You rode beside me today, not ahead." "Yes, I noticed." She went inside her tent, closed the flap, pressed her hand against the bond scar beneath her collarbone, and felt it pulse. Not with the devastating certainty of the corridor, not with the agonizing severance of the ceremony. Something else, something quieter. An ember that had survived the flood and was deciding, slowly, carefully, whether it was safe to glow. The final engagement came with dawn. The minor pack forces had fortified a ridge position that should have been defensible, would have been, against a conventional assault. But Leora's plan was not conventional. She had studied the ridge's water supply during Valdrick's briefing and identified a vulnerability. The natural spring that fed the fortification ran through a narrow gorge to the south. Block the gorge, and the position became untenable within hours. No siege, no direct assault, no unnecessary blood. Theron led the blocking force through terrain that his territorial knowledge mapped with intimate precision. Valdrick coordinated the perimeter that prevented retreat. Emmerich's intelligence network had already identified and neutralized 3 escape tunnels the minor pack leaders had prepared. Draven held the front line, visible, dominant, drawing attention while the strategic work happened around him. Leora directed from the ridge overlooking the engagement. Not hidden, not safe. Visible. So that every wolf on both sides could see who was orchestrating the end of this war. By midday, the fortification surrendered. The minor pack leaders emerged with the particular expression of men who had gambled everything on a patron who promised them a new world and delivered them a prison instead. One of them, a thick-necked alpha named Garen who had led the most aggressive faction, looked up at Draven as guards secured his wrists. "You risk everything for her?" he sneered. Draven did not hesitate. The answer came before Leora could speak, before anyone could intervene, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent 3 days and 3 nights arriving at a truth he should have recognized in a moonlit corridor. "I risk everything with her." Not for, with. The distinction traveled through the assembled wolves faster than fire through dry brush. It reached Leora on the ridge and landed in her chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with the bond and everything to do with choice. By the 3rd night, resistance collapsed. No prolonged siege, no throne burned, no exile demanded. The message was clear without being spoken. The rejected mate had become the line no enemy could cross, not because she was protected by 4 alphas, because she had proven, over and over, in cellars and council chambers and market squares and battlefields, that she was the one doing the protecting. They rode back to Blackmoor in formation, Leora at the center, 4 alphas aligned around her like compass points. The wolves who followed behind them were not following a king, they were following a direction. And for the first time in Blackmoor's long and bloody history, that direction had been set by a woman who held no title and every room. The palace gates opened. The courtyard that had seen arrows and confrontation and the worst night of her life filled with wolves who parted as she rode through. Not bowing, not yet, but watching with the particular attention of a population recalibrating who matters. Leora dismounted. Her shoulder ached. Her body was exhausted in the way that bodies become exhausted after sustained crisis. Not just tired, but finished, emptied, ready for something other than survival. Draven dismounted beside her. His hand hovered near hers. Did not touch. The discipline of earned restraint. She looked at him, at the empty space on his throat where a false mark had been, at the lines around his eyes that had not been there 3 days ago, at the hands that had caught arrows and gripped thrones and trembled in corridors and were now simply waiting. "You survived," she said. "We survived," he corrected quietly. She turned toward the palace steps, the same steps she had descended alone the night of the ceremony, each one carrying her away from everything she thought she had lost. She climbed them now carrying something different. Not a bond, not a title, not the validation of a king's choice. Something harder to name and harder to break. Herself, intact, tested, undiminished. Draven followed, 1 step behind, the precise distance of a man who understood that the woman ahead of him was setting the pace, and that his only job was to keep up. Inside the palace, Seren knelt on the great hall floor, a bucket of soapy water beside him, a brush in his trembling hands. The marble gleamed where he had already worked, polishing stone that still held the molecular memory of a woman's humiliation and a kingdom's applause. He did not look up when Leora passed. She did not look down. Some symmetries speak for themselves, but as she crossed the threshold into the corridor beyond the hall, she paused, turned, not to Seren, to Draven. "Victory is not forgiveness," she said. His eyes held hers. No flinch, no defense. Just the steady gaze of a man who understood that the hardest part of earning something back is accepting that earning has no end point. "I know," he said. "What do you intend to do about it?" "Be patient." "How patient?" "As long as it takes." She searched his face for the calculation she had learned to look for. The political maneuvering, the strategic positioning, found nothing but a man standing in a hallway with empty hands and a willingness to wait. "Then wait," she said, and walked away, not in anger, not in punishment, in the measured pace of a woman who has learned that the most powerful thing she can do is set the terms and trust herself to know when those terms have been met. Draven watched her go, his wolf pressed against his chest, not with the frantic possession of the courtyard or the desperate dominance of the ceremony aftermath, with something quieter, something that recognized the woman walking away, was not leaving. She was leading, and he was learning, painfully, gratefully, with every step she took ahead of him, how to follow. 3 weeks passed. They were not dramatic weeks. They were not filled with arrows or assassinations or the particular chaos that had compressed the first 3 days into a lifetime. They were quiet weeks, the kind of quiet that follows a storm so violent The landscape needs time to remember what stillness feels like. And in that stillness, things grew. Blackmore healed the way old structures heal, slowly, visibly, with the scars left in place because removing them would mean pretending the damage never happened. The council reformed around the gap Seren had left. Elder Alara assumed the advisory seat, and her first act was to propose that council sessions include representation from non-ranked wolves. The motion passed with 10 votes. Not unanimous. Progress rarely is. The territorial alliance held. Theron returned to Ashfang but left a permanent envoy at Blackmore. A young female warrior with his same scarred intensity and a talent for saying exactly what needed to be said at volumes that made diplomats uncomfortable. Valdric established a joint intelligence network between Western Ridge and Shadow Vale. Coordinated through Emmerich's existing infrastructure, the 4 territories did not merge. They aligned. The difference was sovereignty preserved through cooperation rather than consumed by it. Isolde left Blackmore on the 8th day, quietly, without ceremony. She took Callum with her, the 14-year-old brother whose safety had been the chain around her throat for longer than the false bond mark. They traveled to the coastal territory where Isolde's mother's family still held a small estate. Not exile. Choice. The first real choice Isolde had made in years, and Leora stood at the gates and watched her go with the particular ache of watching someone you nearly hated become someone you understand. Isolde paused at the gate, turned back. The mark on her throat was completely gone, just skin, smooth and unburdened. "Will you be all right?" Isolde asked. The question was not about safety. It was about everything else. "I will be what I choose to be," Leora said. "That is enough." Isolde smiled, small, real. The smile of a woman who is learning what her face does when no one is controlling it. She took Callum's hand and walked through the gate, and Leora watched until the road curved and the trees swallowed them and the morning continued without event. The servant girl, whose name was Petra, was appointed to Leora's personal guard, not by Leora's request, by Emmerich's recommendation, which carried the weight of a man who never wasted resources and never bluffed about potential. Petra had spent her life navigating dark corridors and surviving men who believed she was beneath their notice. Those skills, reframed and formalized, made her one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the palace. The girl who had been assaulted in an alcove now carried a blade at her hip and the quiet authority of someone who had been given a reason to stand tall. Leora saw her in the corridor sometimes. They did not speak about the night they met. They did not need to. Petra would incline her head as Leora passed, and Leora would nod back, and the exchange carried the entire weight of a kindness given freely in the dark and returned when it mattered most. Seren scrubbed floors. Every morning, without exception. The Great Hall of Blackmore was vast, and the marble required attention that could not be rushed. He arrived before dawn and worked until the court assembled. His robes were gone. His ring was shattered. His silver hair, once immaculate, hung in unwashed strands around a face that had aged a decade in 3 weeks. His hands, those once steady hands, shook now, not from fear, from the repetitive motion of a brush against stone, from the physical reality of labor performed by a body that had never known it. He did not speak. No one spoke to him. He existed in the particular silence reserved for the disgraced, a silence more punishing than any cell because it occurred in public, in full view of the world he had built and lost. Sometimes Leora crossed the great hall while he worked. She never paused, never looked down, never adjusted her pace. The symmetry was complete. She had knelt on this floor involuntarily. He knelt on it now by sentence. The marble held both memories and treated them with the same indifference that stone offers all human suffering. It simply endured. Draven waited. He did not perform patience. He did not make grand gestures designed to demonstrate how well he was waiting. He simply continued. Rose early. Met with advisors. Reviewed territorial reports. Trained with his guard. Made decisions with the steady, unspectacular consistency of a man who had learned that leadership is not a series of dramatic moments, but the accumulation of unremarkable ones. But Leora noticed the changes. Small, incremental. The kind of changes that only someone watching carefully would detect. He asked Ilara's counsel before announcing policy changes. He had never asked before. He walked the servant corridors once a week, speaking to kitchen staff and stable hands by name. He had never walked those corridors before. He sat with injured soldiers during their recovery, not for display, not with an audience, but because Theron had told him once that a leader who does not smell his own wounded is a leader who has forgotten what he is asking others to bleed for. He did not mention the bond, did not reference the ceremony, did not bring flowers or write letters or attempt any of the romantic architecture that lesser men confuse with redemption. He simply showed up, every day, as a better version of the man who had turned his back in a moonlit corridor, not transformed, corrected. The distinction mattered because transformation implies becoming someone new. And correction implies becoming who you should have been all along. Leora watched, assessed, felt the ember beneath her collarbone pulse a little warmer each week without deciding what to do about it. On the 21st night, she went to the balcony, the same balcony where she had stood after escaping the cellar, the same view of the courtyard below, the gates beyond, the tree line, the mountains that held 4 territories in their ancient geography. The air was cold, clean, the kind of cold that does not punish but clarifies, that strips away everything unnecessary and leaves only what is real. She heard him before she smelled him, the rhythm of his footsteps on stone. She had memorized it without intending to. The particular cadence of a man who carries weight in his shoulders and distributes it through deliberate, even strides. Draven stopped behind her, close enough for warmth, not close enough for contact. The discipline was no longer effort. It had become habit. The habit of a man who had learned that the space between them was hers to close. "You have not slept," he said. "Neither have you." "I had reasons." "Reports?" "No. Thinking." She turned then. The moonlight caught his face. No crown. He had stopped wearing it 2 weeks ago. Not a declaration. A quiet removal that no one questioned because the authority had not diminished with its absence. He looked tired. Not the exhaustion of crisis. The deeper tiredness of a man who has been doing the hardest work there is, which is becoming someone worthy of what he wants. "Thinking about what?" she asked. "About the fact that I have spent 21 nights wanting to come to this balcony and not coming, because you did not invite me. And tonight I decided that patience has a limit. And that limit is reached when the alternative is standing in my chamber, counting stones in the ceiling, while the woman I should have chosen stands alone in the cold." The corner of her mouth shifted. Not a smile. The precursor to one. The facial equivalent of a door left slightly open. "You are here now," she said. "I am here now." Silence, not empty. The kind of silence that holds weight without breaking. The kind that two people can stand inside without needing to fill it with words, because the words have already been said in corridors and council chambers and battlefields, and the quiet, unwitnessed moments of 3 weeks of a man proving through action what his mouth could never repair. He stepped forward, slowly, giving her every second to step back. She did not. The distance between them narrowed to the length of a breath. His scent reached her fully. Storm and cedar, and underneath it, something she had not smelled before. Or rather, something she had smelled once in a corridor 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. The scent beneath the scent. The one that her bond scar recognized, and her wolf answered with a low, cautious stir that was not submission and not surrender, but consideration. He did not reach for her. "I will not kneel where people can see," he said quietly. "That would be performance." Then he knelt on the balcony, in the dark, with no audience except the moon and the woman he had broken and the cold air that carried no judgment. His knee touched stone, his head lowered. Not in submission, in acknowledgement. The deliberate, chosen posture of a man placing himself below the person he wronged, not because she demanded it, but because the geography of the gesture matched the truth of what he felt. "I do not kneel because you require it," he said. "I kneel because 3 weeks ago, you stood in a cellar with iron on your wrists and dust in your lungs, and you freed yourself. Because you rode into a war you did not start and ended it without losing what makes you extraordinary. Because I watched you take a blade from a man who held it to your throat, and I understood in that moment that I had spent my entire reign confusing power with control, and had never once recognized what power actually looked like until it was standing over my mistakes in borrowed clothes with blood on its shoulder." His voice roughened, not breaking, deepening. The register of a man speaking from a place below his pride and above his fear. "I do not kneel to fix what I did. I kneel before the moment I almost lost. The moment I chose applause over the bond. The moment I turned my back in a corridor and walked away from the only thing that ever made the throne feel like anything other than a chair." Leora looked down at him, at the bent head, at the hands resting on his knee, open, empty, offering nothing except their presence, at the place on his throat where Isolde's mark had been and was no longer, just skin, just him, unclaimed, uncrowded, available in a way he had not been since the night everything ignited and everything went wrong. Her eyes burned, not tears, heat, the specific heat of something that has been frozen for weeks, deciding whether to thaw. "Stand up," she said. He rose, slowly, met her eyes, did not reach. "Kneeling does not fix it," she said. "No. Words do not fix it." "No. Then what does?" "Consistency, every day, without audience, without reward, without the guarantee that it will ever be enough." She studied him, the man in the moonlight, stripped of every performance, every title, every defense. Just a man standing on a cold balcony, waiting for a woman to decide if his 3 weeks of unremarkable, unwitnessed, unperformative correction was worth the risk of believing him. "I will never beg again," she said, "for anything, from anyone. If I stand beside you, it will be because I chose to, not because a bond demanded it, or a ceremony required it, or a kingdom expected it." "Then stand," he said, "not because I ask, because you decide. No kneeling, no claiming, no marking, just invitation without coercion, offered by a man who had learned, at a cost he would carry forever, that the most powerful thing he could do was create space and wait for her to fill it on her own terms. She stepped forward, closed the distance herself, placed her hand flat against his chest where his heart beat steady and strong beneath her palm. He covered her hand with his. Equal pressure, neither pulling, neither retreating. "This does not mean I have forgiven you," she said. "I know. This means I am choosing to stand here. That is enough." "It is not. But it is a start." He leaned forward, slowly, rested his forehead against hers. Not a kiss, not a mark, not a claim. Forehead against forehead. The most vulnerable gesture a wolf can offer another, because it requires closing your eyes near someone who has every reason to hurt you and trusting that they will not. She closed her eyes. The bond scar beneath her collarbone pulsed. Not the detonation of the corridor, not the severance of the ceremony. A pulse, slow, warm, imperfect. The heartbeat of something that had been shattered and was not healed, but was deciding cautiously, with the earned wisdom of a woman who would never again confuse fate with guarantee, that it was willing to try. He did not mark her that night. He did not claim her before the pack. He did not perform a ceremony or make a declaration or do any of the things that the world expected an alpha king to do when he had finally earned back what he nearly destroyed. He chose something harder, a time, and 3 weeks became 4, and 4 became 6, and 6 became the night when the territories gathered again in the great hall of Blackmoor, not for a marking ceremony, but for something the kingdom had never seen. Leora stood at the center of the hall, the same marble, the same ancestral banners, the same 500 wolves who had watched her kneel now watched her stand. Draven extended his hand, open, not commanding, inviting. She took it, not yielding, choosing. Equal pressure, equal grip. No one knelt. No one bowed. The wolves watched, and what they saw was not a king reclaiming a discarded mate, but 2 people who had survived each other choosing to walk in the same direction. The scar on her shoulder caught torchlight. She did not hide it. The empty space on his throat caught shadow. He did not explain it. The bond between them did not snap back into place with the explosive certainty of the blood moon corridor. It settled, deep, scarred, stronger for having broken, the kind of bond that is not given by fate, but built by 2 people who understand that the building never finishes, and the maintenance never stops. And the commitment is not to perfection, but to the daily, unglamorous, unrewarded work of showing up. They walked out of the hall together, through the doors she had once pushed open alone, down the steps she had once descended in humiliation, into a courtyard that had seen arrows and blood and the worst and best of what they were. The night air was cold, clean, full of something neither of them named because naming it would reduce it, and what they had survived deserved more than a word. Behind them, the hall emptied. Wolves dispersed to territories and homes and the ordinary lives that continue after extraordinary things. Seren would rise before dawn tomorrow and kneel on marble with a brush in his trembling hands. Petra would walk the corridors with a blade and a purpose. Isolde would wake in a coastal house with her brother beside her and no mark on her throat. Theron, Valdric, and Emmerich would return to their territories carrying the memory of a woman who had changed the axis of power by refusing to be broken on schedule. And Leora Ashvane would stand on a balcony with Draven Kale and feel the bond between them pulse with the slow, scarred, honest warmth of something chosen rather than given. Not fixed, not finished, not fairy tale. Chosen. Before the bite, after the breaking, And somewhere beyond the mountains, past the ridge where 3 nights of war had ended and alliances had hardened into something that would outlast the wolves who forged them, a presence shifted in the dark, patient, calculating, watching the 4 territories breathe as one for the first time in living memory. A voice, low, amused, carrying the particular confidence of something that has been waiting for exactly this moment, spoke into the cold. They have unified. Impressive. The last time, division was sufficient. This time, we will test something more interesting. A pause. The sound of something ancient adjusting its attention. This time, we test love. The darkness settled, and the story continued. Because stories about women who survive do not end with a single victory. They begin with one.